Hi, everybody. Just 1 second. So, first of all, happy 4th of July. And I know most people are celebrating by watching the fireworks, eating barbecue. I just want to celebrate it by talking about the actual Declaration of Independence, what it actually means. Not to say that those things aren't important, but I think that we need to actually go back to a drawing board because this is a very important document. We need to talk about what it actually says, its implications, because the arguments made in the Declaration of Independence did not end in 1776. These are the same conversations that we're having today. These are the same arguments that I wrote in my book and my philosophy about life abolitionism. So I'm going to start out by actually going over the Declaration of Independence. Make sure y'all can see it. Actually, I'm gonna pull this up on a full screen, just for those of you who are looking on your phones. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, government are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, excuse me, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience have shown that mankind is more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing an invariable, gosh, my damn phone, y'all. Just 1 second. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing and invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having indirect object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly negated to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inalienable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative house houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of the states for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out of their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, given his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our table with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, by abolishing the free system of English laws in neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, establishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Gosh, this is such an important part. Let me read that again. For suspending our legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, and burnt our towns and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun, with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for the redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been unanswered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in our attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow their usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. Sanguinity. Excuse me, y'all. I don't know if y'all know what that means, but that basically just means your relationship. It's usually used. I haven't seen it used in this context. It's usually used to mean that you're related to someone by blood. Um, anyway, let's continue. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and peace friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assemble, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, due in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. They are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown. I just lost my spot. And that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. And then it shows who signed it: John Hancock. I'm trying to see if there's any names that are more familiar. John Penn. Anyway, um, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Declaration of Independence. For those of you who are from Philadelphia, you know that Philadelphia was the original capital of the United States. That's where we have the Liberty Bell. You know, I'm from Philly, so I don't know why they decided to move the capital to Washington, D.C., but there's some conspiracy theories about that, which I'm not going to get into right now. Um, this is a very important document. Let me switch this screen. Um, if you were to ask most people where their rights come from, I don't think most people have actually thought about it, but instinctually, they would probably say that our rights come from the Constitution. Even the courts themselves have gotten this wrong. They say that if it's not enumerated in the Constitution and it doesn't exist, that's why they overturned Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision. They got that completely wrong. The Constitution does not create rights. Rights are not created by the government. And so the Declaration of Independence is not about, it's not like the Constitution. It doesn't actually create rights. I don't even think that it enumerate rights. I don't think that the Constitution itself should even be elevated above the Declaration of Independence, because the Constitution as well as the Declaration of Independence are statements of intent. But I just want to clarify, the Constitution was created to limit the state's power, not to create rights. And you can tell by the way that the Bill of Rights was drafted, the language that they use. It's not saying that you have a right. It's basically saying the state can't do this, the state can't do that. It's giving very specific requirements that have to be followed and limiting the state's power. Now, Thomas Jefferson, who did author the Declaration of Independence, relied heavily on John Locke. And as you know, because I've gone over John Locke, I referenced him repeatedly in my book. John Locke took the position that we have natural and inalienable rights, that our rights don't come from kings, parliaments, or states. They are inherent to existence itself. Now, this is important because they could have gone with other philosophers. They could have gone with Hobbes. They could have gone with Rousseau. No, they specifically relied on John Locke. And Rousseau's theory is completely different. His framework is completely different. Rousseau does not say that we have natural and inalienable rights. According to Rousseau, our rights come from the social contract. It comes from the general will. So they're basically gifts from the state, that we have no inherent and inalienable rights independent of the state. And unfortunately, this is the framework that the courts have adopted. And you get a completely different result depending on which framework you follow. He wrote that people are endowed with inalienable rights. It's something that they already exist, they already have just by existing. It's not something that is conferred on them by the government. The government exists to secure those rights, not to originate them. The Declaration of Independence expressly rejected Rousseau's theory about the social contract. I'm not sure why they keep citing the social contract. I'm not even sure why they keep citing the Constitution as the source of rights rather than as a limitation of the state's power. The government is a trustee of your freedom. It is not God. It's not the author of rights. Your rights are pre-political. They pre-exist the state, and they come from the consent of the government, in theory. But now they don't even have to seek our consent at all. They just basically tell us what our rights are and completely trample all over the Constitution. So, who actually signed the Declaration of Independence? John Locke, Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Adams, John Hancock. And under British law at the time, this was considered a high act of treason. If they had lost the war, they would have been prosecuted and hanged. So when the Declaration of Independence says our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, they meant it literally. This was a declaration not just of independence, but of self ownership. The idea that our lives were taken by the king, by the sovereign at that point. The Declaration of Independence came before the Constitution. It basically expresses the founding fathers' original intent. The Constitution came 11 years later. The Constitution established a framework of checks and balances and limitations on the state's power. So when the courts delineated between a liberty and a property interest, I'm not sure where they got that because John Locke didn't say that. Thomas Jefferson never said that. Property, well, liberty is just one of the domains of property. Property includes the person, the life, the person, the estate, and liberty. They are not separate uh, entitlements. The Declaration of Independence, if you actually go back to it, it basically tells you how to recognize when there is government overreach. And if you read the Ninth Amendment, it explicitly says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny others retained by the people. So it is telling you expressly that your rights don't actually come from the government. The Ninth Amendment is a rule of construction that which, for whatever reason, they have completely disregarded the Ninth Amendment. And as you know, John Locke was a huge proponent of self-ownership, that you actually own your life. So there's two levels to this. On one level, the Declaration of Independence was establishing independence from Britain as a colonial ruler. And the main reason is because as a so-called sovereign, Britain was not living up to its duties. It was not taking care of the needs of the people. It was not responding to the petitions of the people. Taxation without consent, dissolved legislatures, quartered troops. So this is basically a divorce decree. We are divorcing ourselves from Great Britain. And then the second level of it is that it was rejecting the theory of state sovereignty. Because under English common law, the king was sovereign. It was thought at the time that, well, the king was put in power by God. So therefore, if you reject the king or you disobey the king, then you're rejecting or disobeying God. The Declaration of Independence basically inverted this sovereignty and says, no, the king is not sovereign, the people are sovereign. The king was never sovereign. It had delegated authority which came from the people. So the state or the king only has just power from the consent of the governed. Only. The idea that the state has absolute unlimited authority and that the state can't be held accountable by the people has been expressly rejected. And I'm not sure how we got to where we are, to where the state has absolute immunity. State actors have qualified immunity. Judges have absolute immunity. The president has absolute immunity. No, the Declaration of Independence expressly rejected this type of sovereignty, this type of immunity. And what sovereignty means is the king can do no wrong. So, no, we don't have a king in the United States, but the same principle applies. The state can do no wrong. The state is acting at the hand of God. You can't sue the state. The state has absolute immunity, not just for damages, but even for declaratory relief or injunctive relief. You can't sue the state directly, which means that you have to sidestep it under 42 USC 1983. You can't sue the state, but you can sue state actors, and even they have qualified immunity. By the way, y'all, if you read my book, the Constitution does not even say this. What the Constitution actually says is that the state, when it talks about state sovereignty, it says that a state is sovereign from citizens of other states, foreign states. It does not say that the state is sovereign from, or excuse me, it does not grant states immunity from its own citizens. And when when the Supreme Court concocted this whole theory that states are sovereign from their own governments, well, they sort of refer back to English common law, which the Declaration of Independence had already rejected. And that is the root cause of so many problems, that you can't hold the government accountable. And as you know, I don't believe that the federal government is the root cause of all these problems. I know all these libertarians and these so-called classical liberals, they cite the federal government as the problem. No, I see the states themselves as being the problem. The states allegedly have general police powers. The states are the ones that issue occupational licenses. The states have the most complete and comprehensive authority over your life. The federal government only has limited authority. If you were to think about your daily interactions with government and regulations that actually impact your life, the federal government is somewhere in the backdrop. It's the states themselves which are making your life a living hell, not the federal government. So I don't know why these libertarians and these other groups don't focus on the states. They keep arguing for states' rights, which also isn't in the Constitution. That is not what the 10th Amendment says. It says that federal, I'm not quoting it for verbatim, but states not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people. They forget the or to the people part. They keep acting as if states have absolute authority and the people themselves have no authority. And if you guys read, well, if you just listen to it, does say that you have the right to overthrow your government. And that also came from John Locke. If your government is not serving your interests, you have every right to overthrow your government and abolish it and establish a new one. That is a case for anarchy. If government is supposed to be based on consent, then it is axiomatic that you have the right to overthrow it. I know they want to call people insurrectionists and act like it's the most treasonous thing that you can possibly do. It's not. It's actually very patriotic because your loyalty should not be to the state or the government or even government officials. It should be to the American people. It should be to the people of your community. Now, I would say that in theory, I'm loyal to the American people, but what unfortunately, the American people have become zombies. They have become hardcore statists where they put the state's interests above the needs of the people themselves. So it's hard to be loyal to the American people when the American people are not even loyal to themselves, that they will turn on their neighbors, that they do weaponize the state. So unfortunately, I can't be loyal to all Americans. I'm only loyal to the Americans who are loyal to the people themselves rather than the state. The state is not the same as the people. It should be. If the state actually represented the will of the people, then it would be the same thing, but it's not. The state is an end unto itself, and then the people are means to the state's ends. That's why they keep talking about declining birth rates, how we need to serve the state. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do. No, I'm asking what my country can do for me. Because if I have to serve you, then I don't need you. You should be serving me. Jefferson wrote that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. This basically means that your rights predate the state. It comes from your consent. So any rights that you had under natural law predate the state. You are the source of the government's authority, not the other way around. He wrote, whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute a new government. Of course, they don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know you have the right to abolish your own government, that it should be based on consent. They make it seem like if you're an anarchist who wants to dismantle the state, that somehow you're so subversive and you're just ignorant. They just want to educate you on how to be a slave, how to not care about freedom anymore. They want a perpetual state. They don't want to negotiate a new social contract that actually represents the current generation, because that's what Henry Thoreau said. The Constitution is only binding on the generation that actually consented to it. Yes, we could negotiate a new social contract. And the fact that I'm an anarchist does not mean that I'm against the rule of law. I don't think the current legal framework serves the will of the American people. I think we should go back to a drawing board and create a new social contract that is representative of the current generation, not the generation back in 1776. People, well, the First Amendment says this: we have the right to petition the government. That includes the right to petition the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. When you file a lawsuit, you are petitioning the courts, you're petitioning the judiciary for a redress of your grievance. This is a natural right. This is an unalienable right. I'm not sure that's a natural right, because that part is a social construct. It is an alienable right. It's not a privilege. It is part, that part right there is a social contract, that when you form the government, then you have a right to petition your government for a redress of your grievance. I don't know how they transformed the practice of law into a privilege. No, when you file a lawsuit, you are petitioning the courts. You have a right to petition, you have a right to freedom of association. Somehow, your right to petition the courts is a privilege that is gate-capped by officers of their courts. By the way, under common law, there were no law licenses. Um, Attorneys were admitted to the local bar after like a 10-minute oral examination, after studying under current attorneys. So they did their apprenticeships, and then they did a 10-minute oral examination. It was nothing like we have today, where you have to get a 4-year degree, a 3-year degree, take a bar exam, go through the fitness requirements, which are so arbitrary. And by the way, the attorneys are the vanguards for liberty. They're supposed to be. They're supposed to be. They're supposed to be the people that you go to make sure that the government is in check, to actually advocate for the people's rights. I'm not sure how they came up with this whole capitalist attorney who doesn't give a shit about the Constitution, who's just there to charge $500 an hour and become wealthy at your expense. I'm not sure how they created these parasites who don't give a shit about the rule of law. Yes, the people do have a right to abolish the government and make the government reflective of their will. Nowhere in the Constitution, nowhere in the Declaration of Independence, nowhere in any of the founding documents does it say anything about governmental immunity. These are doctrines that were concocted by the Supreme Court. And most of these disastrous doctrines came from the Supreme Court. I'm not sure why everybody's protesting Donald Trump for No King's Day, as if Donald Trump is the only one who has absolute immunity. No, judges also have absolute immunity. From the lowest judge to the highest judge, from a judge on a municipal court all the way up to the Supreme Court, they all have absolute immunity. They gave it to themselves based on their own case law. Donald Trump is not the only king. We have a whole bunch of philosopher kings running around making our lives a living hell. And by the way, Donald Trump's absolute immunity is not something he gave to himself. It's something that the Supreme Court gave him. So why were you protesting Donald Trump without going directly to the source? The Supreme Court. We have a system of judicial supremacy. We don't have 3 co-equal branches of government. We have a system in which the judiciary and their lawyers, their officers of the court, control everything. Most governors, most city council members of Congress, presidents, attorney generals, secretaries of state. Most of these positions are occupied by attorneys. We don't have a government of men, we have a government of attorneys. And that is not what we're supposed to have. We're supposed to have a civilian government based on that is government or what occupied by ordinary people. We didn't have these complicated legalese to where nobody could understand it. No, laws back then were written in plain English. Any person of ordinary intelligence could understand them. Now, they have created a system in which, well, it's so complicated that nobody can understand it but lawyers, and now they try to use their intentionally complicated doctrines to say that nobody should be able to understand the law except attorneys. That if you're not an attorney, then you should not have a say in your own government. You should defer to the attorneys. How is that not tyrannical? How is that a system of despotism? Despots, a whole bunch of despots controlling this whole country. Tyranny of the fucking lawyers. And they're fucking, I don't know what you call a judge. A judge is just a lawyer in a robe. Yes, the modern legal system has adopted the sovereign doctrine that the king can do no wrong. We don't have kings, but the state can do no wrong. So those state actors are kings. Anybody who has immunity is a king. Whether they are governors, whether they're judges, whether they're the president, members of Congress, the legislature, state legislatures, they're all kings. The Declaration of Independence expressly rejected the notion of an unaccountable government. And yet, that is exactly what we have today. Notice that they always tell you, oh, don't take the law into your own hands. Don't engage in civil disobedience or these other political tools. You should use their political avenues. You should file a lawsuit. And yet, when you do file a lawsuit, well, guess what? They have immunity. Not in the Constitution, but the judges are going to construe it because their interpretations of the Constitution, even if it's based on nothing, even if they created it out of thin air, judicial interpretations of the Constitution have the same legal effect as the Constitution itself. No legislature can actually overrule a judicial interpretation of the Constitution. The only thing that can do that is a constitutional amendment. So that is not co-equal branches of government. That is the judiciary having more authority than other branches. And I don't know if you guys understand how immunity works. I know people said that my book was too complicated. I don't know, but if you don't ask questions, then I can't answer them. The way immunity works is it doesn't matter what the facts of your case are. You don't get any discovery. They don't even consider the facts. What they consider is who you're suing. If you're suing the state has absolute immunity regardless. Judges have absolute immunity. There's limited exceptions because if judges are engaged in an administrative role, there's some things that are administrative. No, that doesn't give them immunity, absolute immunity. They only have immunity for judicial functions, But I want you to understand that even if you sue them for something that is purely administrative, they still construe it to be judicial rather than administrative. They do have that discretion to construe the facts however they want. And then when you're drafting a lawsuit, you have to um, have sufficient, your pleadings have to be sufficient enough to where you can override their qualified immunity for any other state actors, which is very difficult to do, especially when you're not able to get discovery. Because sometimes you don't have all the facts. You just know, I mean, the government operates in secrecy anyway. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You can't prove it. The only thing you know is that you were adversely impacted. Can you actually show their intent without discovery? No. You don't know what their actual intent, and of course they're going to give deference to whatever the state actor happens to be. The two requirements for overcoming qualified immunity is that the state actor has to violate clearly established law, and you have to show that they didn't act in good faith. I don't know how you can prove that they didn't act in good faith unless you get discovery. You don't know what their intent is. Even if a police officer shoots you, you can't prove that he didn't do it in good faith. Maybe he can lie and say that he thought you had a gun. And of course, the courts are going to give deference to the state actor. So, regardless of what the facts are, this is a threshold issue that you have to get past immunity. And I love how they try to spin it to say that these doctrines were created for the public's benefit because without them, well, people would just when this is how they frame it. If you sue the state, you're basically suing the people. And so if the state has to pay damages for the injuries that it causes, then that basically harms the American people. No, it doesn't. It harms the American people by not holding the government accountable. That they have to suffer these violations in perpetuity, these breaches of the fucking social contract. Now, I'm not saying we don't have a social contract. I'm just saying our rights don't come from the social contract. I don't really believe in a social contract, but at the very least, some of these rights are social constructs, even if it's not a social contract. It's not really a social contract because it's not based on consent or meeting of the minds, or there's no offer, acceptance, none of that shit. None of the indicia of a contract are present in a social contract. So if you're trying to figure out the founding fathers' original intent, you really need to go back to the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence predates the Constitution. You don't have to keep begging the government. You don't have to keep petitioning. You don't have to keep filing lawsuits and just, I guess you're going to vote harder. You're going to keep voting until you get the result that you want. No, you don't have to do that shit. You have the right to fucking overthrow these motherfuckers. I don't think that's sedition. It's right in one of the founding documents. And it explicitly says it in, well, I haven't read every state constitution. It does say that in my state constitution that you do have a right to overthrow the government. It says it right in the first clause, right in the Bill of Rights under the state constitution. I'm assuming that it does say that in other constitutions. I don't know because I haven't confirmed it. So no King's Day is only about one king. I think it's because of the media. You think that the president is the only asshole in America and that you don't have assholes serving in government at the local level? You absolutely do. Your mayor may be one of these kings. Your mayor may be one of these assholes. Your governor, your county commissioners. So if you're going to protest against the lack of government accountability, you might want to start at your local level instead of just starting with, because it does trickle up. It trickles up from the bottom all the way up to Trump. Because when Trump is no longer in office, you're going to have another asshole who's going to be making people's lives a living hell. And for whatever reason, people don't see it when the dictator is on their side. When they're getting their way, when they're getting the policy that they want, they don't realize that, okay, yes, you're happy because you're getting your policy preferences, but somebody else is not getting their policy preferences, right? So it's best to have a limited government that actually governs based on the their enumerated authority. I know it is politically expedient to have to have executive orders and just not go through the political process. I mean, as y'all see, Trump did overthrow Biden's student loan relief program. Why? Because Biden did not go through the political process. I still think that's bullshit, because even if Biden did it through an executive order, that still was a contract by someone who had apparent government authority. So if I sign a contract to be under Biden's student loan program, then I should still operate under that same contract. I think I'm going to be doing another live stream to talk about the new student loan program under Trump. For those of you who need help with, I think I need to do another live stream about that, but I'll save that for another day. Now let's talk about the right to the pursuit of happiness, because this is not in the Constitution. And like I said, the Constitution doesn't create rights anyway. But the Declaration of Independence does say that we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What this means is that the government has a negative duty to stand out of the way. It's not creating a positive rights, but it's basically saying the government shouldn't, at the very least, the government should not be the cause of anybody's misery. You should be free to pursue happiness on your own merit. There should be no occupational licenses gatekeeping your ability to earn a livelihood. The government should not be taking taxes, making sure that they get their cut before you get yours. It should not be causing people to live a life of poverty. It should not be inserting itself into private marital contracts, who can get married and who can't. It should not be regulating every aspect of your life, extracting and using red tape to prevent you from living your natural potential. The right to the pursuit of happiness is based on individual sovereignty, that you should own your life and you should be free to do whatever you want, to the extent that you're not harming anyone else. And I don't think that harming someone else is subjective. It's not. If you're not inflicting violence on someone, if you're not taking advantage, and I know, there's probably someone who wants to obfuscate and probably is going to say, "Oh, but if you do this, you're harming someone." Okay, if you want, like for example, if you're not, this is what some of these haters might say: if you're not quote unquote qualified, then you're harming someone. Okay, by that same logic, then I could say that you're harming someone by procreating. I mean, how far do you want to take this? You're harming someone by bringing them into existence. So if you want to say that the government should have absolute authority to dictate every aspect of people's lives and to get into the minutia of what constitutes harm or isn't harm, then maybe the government should start by regulating people's ability to procreate. I'm not saying that the government should do that, but if you want to take shit to its logical conclusion, we can go as far as you want to go. It does not create an argument for unlimited state power. It does not justify relegating human beings to being perpetual children who can't make decisions for themselves and must turn to the government for every personal decision that they make. You're too incompetent to decide who is competent to represent you, so the state should decide. No constitutional authority for that whatsoever, not in any state constitution, nor in the Constitution at the federal level. The modern state rejects the principle of self ownership. They're not going to say this. They're going to say that life itself is inalienable, or that it can't be alienated. Excuse me. Let me say that correctly. They're going to say that nobody can own life because life itself is inalienable. That's not what it means. Your right to life includes the right to maintain your life, which includes the right to earn a livelihood so that you can have the material goods, the material wealth to maintain your life. It is not a privilege. Your liberty is not a privilege. Your life, including the right to die, is not a privilege. If you own your life, then you have disposal rights. So the modern state has, through its own doctrines, rejected the principle of self ownership. It has rejected independence. Now, let's read through some of these comments. Um, wow. It's raining and storming on this country's 250th birthday. Excuse me, year anniversary. I believe this is spiritual for slavery. Okay. Um, all right, y'all. That was my rant for the 4th of July. Hopefully people got something out of this. But there's no comments and it is almost 5 o'clock. I guess I'm gonna go get something to eat. So you all have a good day. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe.